Hi, today we're going to talk about the features of form in Billy Elliot. And we're going to focus our discussion around this question: how do the features of film reveal Billy's character? And so by form, we're really talking about film. Okay, so when we talk about form, it's either novel, film, drama, that type of thing. And so we're going to say, well, how are the filmic techniques of the film, how they used to construct the messages and the images of the character of Billy Elliot. And this is a deliberate intention by the director Stephen Daldry. And what's really important when you're writing English essays is that you step out of the text. So rather than talking about what's happening in the narrative, you step out and you talk about how the director is using filmic techniques in particular to convey the message. So you can say, this is the idea of the film, these are the messages that are presented, and this is how it's constructed. And that's why this is important. When you're asked a question in the HSC or the trials, it's either going to be on ideas, it's going to be on form, or it will be on something like character, or it might even be to do with context and how the context frames the messages of the film. So certainly you could get a question on form, but regardless of what you get, you're going to talk about all those things, ideas, forms, context, whatever the other thing I said. Okay, so we're just going to run through a few, and I'm just going to give some brief examples of these things in the film. So the first term we want to talk about is mise-en-scene, and basically that's like a freeze frame. If you press pause on the film, you're looking at the way that the scene is constructed. So it's the composition of the scene, and so generally speaking, we can look at a scene and think about the camera angles, the use of lighting, sound, how things are positioned, whether they're in the foreground or the background, or wherever they're placed, what the salient image is, the use of colour, the use of costume or props, those type of things. And we can look at how those aspects of the scene convey the message that the director's attempting to convey. So, and you can do that anywhere in the film, and really what you're going to do when you're making a point about identity, or it might be about dreams and reality, or whatever the idea is that you're exploring, you're going to support it by talking directly and specifically about scenes. And we'll look at, we might go straight to camera angles, because that's a good example, because that's going to support this mise-en-scene. And so we've got a whole range of camera angles that we can talk about, and you certainly don't have to talk about all of them. You're just going to pick things that are relevant to the scene you're talking about. One's generally suitable. So you might talk about the use of an establishing shot, which is pretty much just like a front-on shot, and they're used at the beginnings of significant scenes, so the start of the film, but if there is like a change of setting or that type of thing, they're used. And so in the beginning of the film, you'll see that there's a close-up shot used, and it's used as a way of orientating us and introducing us to the character of Billy. So we'll look at those in another tutorial in a little bit more depth, but you're invited into the film in that first establishing shot. Through the use of close-up, we see Billy's face, and we get to understand a little bit about his personality. We could talk about the costume that he's wearing, and the movement, the expression on his face tells us a lot about him, gives us that insight. It invites us into the story. This is the story about Billy and his adventure, his journey that he's going to go on. They also like to use point of view shots, so that's essentially where you are placed in the position of the character and you're seeing the action through the main character's eyes. And there's a classic scene where Billy, and it's pretty close to the start of the film, where Billy's in the boxing ring and he looks out and then he looks back and he gets punched in the face. and we see that from his point of view, and that's a way of endearing the viewer with the character, and enabling them to understand the gravity of the situation. And in that scene, that's really important, because Billy is at a point where he wants to dance, but he's being thrust into this masculine world of boxing, and it's quite comic in the sense that he hits the ground, but it does reinforce that idea of gender stereotypes, and that he is going to be bullied if he doesn't follow that traditional gender expectation. Now, we want to talk about undershots and overshots. So undershots coming from beneath, and overshots are the ones looking down. And there's a scene where Mrs. Wilkinson comes to Billy's home and confronts Jackie about the fact that Billy has a lot of potential as a dancer. And Billy's standing on the table, and this is a really significant moment of internal conflict for Billy, because his two worlds are colliding. His world of his home and his family, and then the world of his dreams and his passions, and they're two separate entities, and at this point they're colliding, and he's stuck in the middle of it. And so what the director cleverly does is uses cut shots between Jackie and Billy, from Jackie's perspective looking under, and then from Billy's, because he's on the table looking down, and so we see their reactions in a rapid series of cut shots, and that really emphasises the conflict that Billy's going through, and it's the tension. His world's about to implode, and then we see he runs out of the house, and that's his way of dealing with it as the tension rises. So these do go together quite well. The next thing we'll talk about is this idea of non-diegetic sound. There are two types of sounds in a film. There's diegetic and there's non-diegetic. So we'll talk about non-diegetic first, and that's basically sound that's added to the natural sounds of the scene. So the director is making a deliberate choice of using some voiceover, adding some music, layering that over the top, or maybe using some sound effects for effect. And so if we talk about diegetic sound then, and I thought I'd use an example, and I'm just making this up, of a kitchen scene. And so the sounds that would come out of the kitchen would be knives and forks scraping on plates, the kettle whistling, the rustling of a newspaper, the TV or a radio might be on in the background. So they're all natural to that environment. So that's a diegetic sound. But once the director makes that artistic decision to overlay a voiceover or some sound effects or music, then that's the diegetic sound. And so we want to be aware of that, and we want to talk about that somewhere in our response, because this is part of how the scene is constructed. And so we'll look in a moment how music, how songs from the era are used to layer that meaning and really drive home the message of what the importance of that scene is. I should mention too that when we're talking about the film Billy Elliot, we underline Billy Elliot, and that's one reason we do that is because that way you know whether you're talking about the title of the film or you're talking about the character Billy Elliot. But it's just the convention anyway. So if you're talking about a complete text, you underline it. So a novel, a film, a play, you'll underline. But if it's a poem or a song, you put it in inverted commas, because that's just one small part of the bigger text. So let's talk about some other filmic techniques, or the features of form really. We're moving away from the camera angles to more sort of literary techniques that are features of film. So one is a motif, and that is a recurring image. So it's an image that appears a number of times throughout the film, and what it does is it conveys a particular meaning, and generally it builds upon each time you see it. So classic examples are the ballet shoes and the boxing gloves, and they're representing the two worlds that are evident in the film, the world of imagination and beauty and dance, and then the world of the reality of that hard mining town existence. But let's talk about the swans. I think that's an interesting one to talk about, because there's a subtle moment where there are swans on the wallpaper, and then of course there's Billy leading towards dancing in Swan Lake, and what these do, or these images do, is they really trace and they confirm Billy's transition from innocence to more maturity. So it's that progression from child into an adult, into him being able to enter the world, you know. So at the start of the film, he's viewing the world through the eyes of an innocent child, and he's not aware of all these gendered expectations and social norms and things like that. And he navigates his way through that throughout the film to achieving that point of maturity. So we see him move from a child to an adult, much like the cygnet transforms into the swan. So you've got that sort of like the ugly duckling, the quite rough around the edges in that story, and then transforms into the beautiful swan. So it is drawing on our cultural understandings of stories like that, to tell the story of Billy and his transformation. And certainly what he's doing is he's transforming into his true self. And by the time he concludes, the film concludes, he has discovered his true identity, and he's achieved success in that realm.